Hi, everyone. This is Achyuta Bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and I am going live today in order to talk about a few of the transits that are coming up this week. We have some major transits happening over the course of the next 7 days, all the way up to, if you extend it a little bit more than that, up to 2 weeks. And I want to try to break down those transits this week one at a time because it's a little overwhelming to talk about them all at once. So I'm going to try to walk through the first major transit that's happening this week, which is the Sun in Libra making an opposition to Mars retrograde. And that is happening over the next couple of days. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about when that's happening and what to expect from it. But before I do that, I want to sort of zoom out and speak to the overall sequence of events that's happening so that we can contextualize this Sun Mars opposition within the scope of the next 2 weeks. So we'll do that first. By the way, thank you guys for tuning in. I'm seeing more people joining the live stream. Feel free to say where you're from. I love seeing where people are tuning in from. So I see someone from Michigan. That's where my family was. My mother and father were born and raised in Michigan. Anyway, Australia, Portland, nice, cool. So here's the sequence of events. You have the Sun in Libra making the opposition to Mars retrograde in Aries. Then you have the Sun in Libra hitting the square to Pluto in Capricorn. Then the Sun will square Saturn in Capricorn. Now, as all of that is happening, you still have Mars within a very close range of a square to Pluto. And the Sun, as it walks through these transits, will be in the midst of what's called a malefic enclosure, which means it'll be sandwiched between the rays of Mars and Saturn, which can be extremely difficult for a planet. The Sun is already in the sign of its fall in Libra, so we have the potential for solar significations to fall on hard times. And that can mean a variety of different things, which we'll discuss today. But it can also mean, just generally speaking, that action, one of the Sun's major significations is action in the world. What motivates or guides our action, our sense of aspiration, what we're moving toward in life, in any area of life, can be temporarily prohibited or restrained or kind of put into a difficult situation. So that is what we are going to that'll also be a part of what we discuss. Now, all of that unfolds along the following timeline. You're going to see the Sun in Libra going through the opposition to Mars between now and Wednesday, but it'll carry over into Thursday as well. As soon as it does so into Thursday, you're going to see the Sun squaring Pluto. And then as soon as it passes over that, and exactly after it passes over the opposition to Mars, it's also in the enclosure to Saturn, which it will not pass through completely until the end of this week, beginning of next week into Sunday. So this week is it's like a very hairy situation for the Sun in particular. And again, we'll unpack that in a minute. Now, in the meantime, what else is happening? Well, many of you probably know that Mercury is also about to station and is in the process of stationing into today and tomorrow. And then that stationing turns to retrograde by later this week, Wednesday into Thursday. You kind of have that shift happening. So that retrogradation of Mercury is also happening in an exact opposition with the planet Uranus. And then Mercury will back through the opposition with Uranus through next week. And as that is happening, the Sun has finally broken free of the enclosure. But if you take all of that together, you have about 10 days, maybe a little bit more, where you have arguably, when I set out and wrote my overview for the 2020 year at the end of last year, this was probably in my top one to, like, aside from the Saturn Pluto conjunction at the beginning of the year, this was like the next one or two most intense periods of the year that I had written down. Now, I could be totally wrong about that. I'm not always right about what I think is going to be the most intense astrology. You could look at it and go, wow, that looks like it's going to be really intense. But sometimes it's like you're really caught off guard or surprised by what transits end up being really significant. And that's just part of this astrological, study journey. But I think this one's going to be quite intense. And so let's now try to unpack at least the first step of this process. And what I'll be doing over the course of this week and into next week is taking it each step of the way so that we can unpack this very pivotal next sequence of events step by step. So today we're just going to focus on the sun opposite Mars, with in the background the connotation being that the sun is going to get into this malefic enclosure with Mars, Saturn, and Pluto in the next couple of days as well. All right, so first of all, what does the sun signify and what could it be facing when it hits in opposition to Mars? Well, the sun signifies action in the ancient world. Just like the sun rises every morning, we rise, we get out of bed, we go and do things in the world based on a set of ideals or ambitions or aspirations, or based on obligations, based on things that we have to do that we don't really want to do. But we all have actions that we take in the world every day. And just like the sun rises and sets, we rise and we set. We go out and we do things, we take actions, and then we retire at the end of the day, and then we wake up and we do it again. So the sun as the sun as a symbol of action in the world right now is about to go through a period of time where what it wants to do is prohibited, challenged, or you can get the cosmic red light. Basically, you can get someone coming in and saying, no, I'm sorry, you can't do that. You can't go forward in the way that you would like to, or it's going to be very difficult if you try to. And why? Because we have the god of war, conflict, strife opposing the sun right now. And then we have Saturn, that the sun is going to go into the enclosure between Saturn and Mars after this opposition with Mars happens, representing constraint and limitation, right? So action will be prohibited. It's very likely to experience obstacles. Now, obstacles to what in particular? Well, with Libra, it's going to be potentially obstacles to fairness, obstacles to justice, obstacles to an outcome that is harmonious or agreeable. So the sun in Libra might be a picture of an agreeable, harmonious, pleasant outcome, or an action motivated by something Venusian. I want to do something and have a kind of Venusian outcome. That's the sun in Libra. And Mars in Aries, on the other hand, is saying, no, I have another interest, I have another demand, I have another need, and it's going to directly compete with, conflict with, or put up some kind of obstacle for you so that you can't do it. And Saturn is also there saying something kind of similar, saying there's restraint, there's limitation, there's time, there's patience. And all of these qualities together could say, on the one hand, that you need to be persevering right now. You need to be determined, and you need to persevere and stick with something. So sticking with something has that theme could have a lot of resonance over like the next 10 days. Pushing through when being met with opposition, pushing through. On the other hand, there's also this aspect of the Sun, Mars, Saturn symbolism that can speak to what happens if I try to push through in a spirit of self-righteousness, or in a spirit of being, if I'm being domineering or if I'm being bullying, then the outcome may end up generating conflict, entanglement, and even a certain degree of disaster. So there's a hexagram in the I Ching that depicts this really nicely. I'm going to turn off my phone so it is sort of buzzing over here and it's distracting me. So let me just turn this off. So there's an I Ching hexagram number 39, and it's, I think, one of the translations that I've seen repeated a bunch is obstacle. That's the name given to the hexagram. So in the hexagram obstacle, it shows someone who's basically confronting an obstacle, or who might even be sort of limping along on their path toward something that they're trying to do. And the hexagram has two meanings, as I've understood it over time. One is that if you try to persevere stubbornly and self-righteously and insistently when the universe is giving you an obstacle, and you don't stop to reflect, why did this obstacle come between me and my desired outcome, then there's a chance that you'll invite disaster. because when obstacles come up, if we don't take time to consider, to reevaluate, to figure a way of going around the rock in the road rather than just slamming our head against it and trying to, sort of bulldoze through it, then we can invite disaster. If we, on the other hand, if an obstacle comes in our way, and we persevere because we need to fight the good fight, or we persevere because we understand that difficulties are a part of life, right? You can't just give up just because an obstacle comes up. And generally, people who are successful in such moments of persevering and working through an obstacle are those who sit down and first acknowledge this obstacle is here for a reason, for a divine reason that is sacred. Even if I don't like it, even if it seems unfair or unjust, that this obstacle is here for me, not against me. And we have to at least compartmentalize the experience and reflect upon it as the hand of the Tao, as the hand of God, as the hand of the universe. And in other words, you have to resist the temptation to immediately react and resist the obstacle that comes up. And when you do so, then there's something, when you just resist that temptation and sit back and go, why is this here? And even if you can't figure out just one answer to that question, but if you sit and kind of allow for the obstacle to just be what it is, oftentimes it's that adjustment, that pausing of our reactive nature that will prevent you from bulldozing forward and knocking your head on it and provoking some kind of disastrous outcome. So, and typically, if we take that time to reflect on why an obstacle comes up, we will find a more strategic, tactful, patient, and sensitive way of flowing like water, so to speak, around an obstacle. So right now, the sun in Libra especially can be faced with, what do I want to say? It's not fair. It doesn't feel just. It doesn't feel like a fair situation. And I don't feel like I should have to be in this position, because Libra, of course, is concerned with harmony, and the sun as a picture of action with the desired result of harmony or pleasantness, is not going to get there, just the way that it wants to. And so another question is, how do we deal with the feeling of there being almost like a persecutor or a force or an influence or an event that's like unfair somehow? And how do we deal with that? Again, it's very tempting to want to deal with it self-righteously, especially if you know you're in the right about something. That makes it really, really hard to pause and consider that some kind of compromise may be necessary, or some tactfulness or patience that we really shouldn't have to display is necessary. Excuse me. So, just remember that right now, that if some degree of unfairness comes up, you're like, that's just not fair, Or if something comes up from the past that you thought you had overcome, but it reappears somehow, and you're like, this sucks. I shouldn't have to be dealing with this again. If something like that happens, again, it's really important not to react, at least for like the next 10 days. I would say, or not at least, but at least for, at least like through this weekend, I would not recommend reacting. Whereas, on the flip side of next week, after Mercury's turned retrograde, after it's gone through its opposition to Uranus, after the sun has passed out of the enclosure and so forth, you're much more likely to have a level-headed way of dealing with something than you are if you try to push through something right away. But it doesn't have to take that long either. It's not literally about waiting for the astrology to pass. People say that all the time to me. They're like, should I just wait until something has passed in order to deal with it and make a choice or take an action? No, it's not. It's not that. It's just, sometimes it is. Sometimes you're more prone to making reactive decisions when the astrology is really potent. But it's also just like, if it's raining, take your umbrella out. If you know that something is happening, you can take the appropriate action at any time during a transit and kind of respond to what's happening. But it's very important that you respond at this time anyways very patiently, very tactfully to the obstacles or oppositions that confront you, especially where there's a sense of moral indignation or like moral or ethical outrage. It's not a good time to be like, let's go real eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, tit for tat. If you do this, then I'll do that. You're in the wrong, I'm in the right. So that allows me to become some kind of vigilante in the situation. Be really careful of feeling the empowered feeling of being right and what it leads you to feel like you can do right now that could actually entangle you and make things a lot more complicated. So those are some of the lessons of the moment. Now let's speak a little bit about the sun as father. Whether it's father or king or queen or CEO or anyone who's like the head of an organization or who's the leader, could go through a period of challenge, opposition, persecution, even health problems. In some cases, this can be seen as a symbol of the death of such figures. So, for example, a mundane expression of the sun opposite Mars will be a military coup formed against the leader. It will be where one leader seizes power by force. It can be a symbol of the death or illness of a king. One of the things that's here in the United States right now, obviously, Donald Trump had the coronavirus. He's been sick, and right now he wants to push forward when obviously there's a lot of debate about whether he should do that or not, considering his health. So, and also you could also say that they're about to try to ram through a Supreme Court nominee right now, and there's going to be resistance to that, and there's going to be this whole thing about fairness and ethics around that, right? So, those are some of the mundane manifestations, but you could also see the sun opposite Mars as powerful solar figures, whether they are leaders of any kind, male or female, or or like a political figure, the head of an organization, being challenged directly or threatened or hurt or even falling ill or dying. Those would be like the worst significations. I have seen in my practice, not that I sit around and predict this stuff very often at all, but in my practice, I have seen the sun as father sometimes pass when receiving an opposition from Mars in the natal chart. So sometimes it is the signification of the sickness, illness, the sudden heart attacks or strokes or, hardships that may fall upon a father or a father figure. And I don't say that to scare anyone. It's just one of the potential significations. It can also be if the sun stands for anything that kind of gives something its the sense of centrality. So in the old world, the kings are lawgivers. So it's like Hammurabi's code or something like that. So you have the king that's like a central figure, a representation or even manifestation of the gods or God, and they stand somehow at the center of civilization and like hold everything together. And in a patriarchal sense, the father holds everything together. It doesn't have to be literally masculine or male, but just anything that holds it all together. Your ego, your sense of I, or your sense of self can be a sort of like the sun. Anything that holds that central integrity that holds it all together can face a challenge. And that challenge may be good. It could help you to revise something, a little bit of ego death or a little bit of the fundamental center of something being challenged can mean that it is time for it to be reformed. Mars retrograde can be a little bit of a renegade or a maverick who comes along and challenges something. And there may be questions specifically in challenging the way something is done in terms of what creates greater peace or harmony or ease or fairness, beauty, things like that. This can also be about individual or personal needs, demands, or wishes versus collective concern. So what does the group feel, or what do we feel versus what do I demand or want or need? And those kinds of dichotomies can step up a lot right now too, with the sun in Venus's sign opposite Mars, because they're natural planetary contraries. Venus is concerned with harmony. Often Mars is more individualistic. So those kinds of concerns can also be pretty profound right now. Um, Now, this is going to come along with sort of shocking, disturbing revelations or unseen stuff coming to the surface sort of erratically and really disrupting the status quo, because Mercury is also about to turn retrograde in Mars's sign, deep watery sign that often involves hidden information when Mercury is in Scorpio, about to turn retrograde and oppose Uranus, the great flashy, sudden lightning strike. It's like a bit like the Tower card in tarot. This Mercury opposite Uranus that we're going to be going through over the next week is also going to reveal a lot of things and suddenly present us with challenges or changes and twists of the plot that we have to respond to. And they may not feel fair. We may feel like, are you kidding me? I have to do this again. But working through those things right now is very important and is part of a longer term promise of deeper peace and harmony if we do the work and don't flip out and basically bide our time, accept what's coming to us right now as an aspect of our karma. Things can come to us that are an aspect of our karma that are also an expression on the worldly plane of unfairness, right? So in other words, my karma can designate me to experience something that in this world is very unfair, and it's my karma to receive that. And I can't go blaming people for that or trying to push it off onto someone or something else. I have to take accountability for it. But people always misunderstand that's not mutually exclusive to there also being an aspect of human justice that's on the line. Like someone could have done something to me, it's my karma to receive, but they still are doing something that's unjust or unfair. And so there's this duality that we have to I don't know if duality is the right word even, but we have to be able to hold two realities at once, that something unfair can happen to us that truly is unfair or unjust. And there's a level at which that karma will eventually have to resolve itself as well. At the same time, it is our karma to receive or experience that injustice, and that is totally fair. And we have to be able to hold both realities simultaneously, or we won't grow spiritually. We'll get stunted because we'll start trying to act like the judges over everything, and we can't do that because we don't have enough, apparatus. Our equipment isn't good enough to understand the totality of karmic law and of the flow of the Tao and creation. We get little understanding of it. So it's very important in such situations that your number one guard against calamity right now is trust and patience. Trust and patience, and maybe a third one would be tact. And there's a famous sculpture. I think it's a sculpture. I think it was by Rodin, maybe, but it's The Thinker. You guys seen that? He's like this. So much of the time we miss being the best stewards of the moment because we don't sit with something in front of us before acting upon it. Sitting with an experience, sitting with the reality of something allows us to start seeing its multivalence. When an event comes, for example, and blocks us from something we want to do or accomplish, if we sit with it and allow it to be just what it is, and we sit with it long enough, we start circumambulating it. It's like we start meditating upon it, you start moving around it. When we start moving around it, you realize that the view that you have of it from the space of resistance is only one side of it. So you have to keep moving around it for a little bit, and then that allows us to see multiple sides of it. When you see multiple sides of it, there's usually the multivalence, like in chemistry, there's going to be a connection site for you that is the exact answer and the exact next step in your life that you know in your heart is right, but you can't figure out what the connection to the current moment is unless you sit with it for a while. The enclosure that's coming up with the sun is a perfect time to do such a to have such a meditation, but it won't work if you only look at it in terms of this thing that opposes me or this thing that's unfair, and I'm going to react, or I'm going to threaten, or I'm going to try to impose my will on the situation, or I'm going to try to move forward at all costs. Go back to hexagram 39 one last time. Obstacle. There's two sides to this hexagram as I've learned them. One is if you persevere, try to bang your head through an obstacle with kind of obstinance and just thick-headedness, you'll meet with disaster. If on the other hand, you persevere in a righteous cause, but learn how to flow around an obstacle, you will succeed. And the difference has to do in how we sit and engage with the reality of what an obstacle is. It has to become more than just one thing for us to know how to move around that thing in more than just one way. So that's the advice that I would give for like the next week and a half in a general sense, as well as watching for these significations of the sun opposite Mars that you're going to see in the next couple of days. The other thing is watch, just in general, watch for blowups, watch for temperamental qualities. The nobler part of you, you know, the sun, which is that kind of part in all of us that's seeking the higher truth and essence of things, that wants to be the best version of ourselves, kind of an emblem of like something high and light. The light of spirit, etc. And then you're thinking about Mars, you know, will and action. And we're going to be challenged at times to be the best version of ourselves versus becoming or devolving into something that's got a really heavy hand, or that wants to just enforce or insist upon something. So be careful of that temptation. I know I'll be careful of it and it could be something as silly as like with your kids, or with a spouse, or with a loved one, or at work, or with a friend. It doesn't have to be the world's biggest issue, but just watch for the spirit of like uncompromising stubbornness. Be careful of that one right now in particular. And if you meet it in other people and it seems unfair or it's imposing something upon you, give it a little bit of time. The secret that a lot of people don't know about these oppositions is that after an opposition is done, one planet will become dominant over the other. So right now they're like at a standstill, Sun and Mars. Sun is slowly going to be moving into the superior position over Mars in the days and weeks and months ahead, which means that the crisis you're facing now is something you definitely can overcome, and you will, but you have to take the high path. You have to take the high road. Because if you it's kind of like you're planting the seeds of a new cycle right now between your sense of what is high and good and the best way of going about getting things done. All right, that's what I've got for today. I hope that this was interesting for you. I'll take any Q&A if you have them on, what's going on or anything astrological in general. I'm going to just look up in the chat box and see what you've got. Thank you all for being here. It's nice to see so many people from Chattanooga, Sacramento, Manchester, India, Colorado, England, Southern Utah. Nice. North Wales, Colorado, Cape Town. Wow, so awesome. Really, really cool to spend time with all of you. Let's see. I watch you daily like some people watch the news. Oh, that's that. If you spend time contemplating the stars, it has an impact on you that is actually a lot healthier than the news, I think. But because it's like you're really learning to see these heavenly divine. For Plato, like the A Day, you're learning to see that these patterns were thought of as thoughts in the mind of God that inform reality. Reality is like this moving mandala of these patterns, and reflection upon them gradually helps us to engage with them from a more conscious point of view. That's like the thing that the news doesn't give you. It gives you the cycle of up and down all the time, but it doesn't give you that sense of contemplative, meaningful, or soulful engagement with why any of this is happening at all. Which is why I don't watch a lot of the news, frankly. I check in on it every day before I do my, typically like my, if I'm writing new content, like I'll see what's up in the news, but I don't watch the news very much. No offense to anyone who does. Let's see. Winter Park, Florida, Oregon, Italy. Wow, nice. Australians are calling action against our tyrannical dictators. Yeah, see, there's that really revolutionary, like, fight the man, like that Mars opposite the sun, or I'll do it. I don't care what you say, or I don't care if it's against the rules, or, like that. Those things are really strong right now. Don't forget to smash that like button, folks. Thank you. Thanks, Crystalline Crow. I appreciate that. I'm always too embarrassed to say all that stuff. Like, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. I probably should do that, but let's see. How to cultivate tactfulness. Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, to me, you need some human interaction in your life, and you have to have some friends or somewhere to interact with people who are like-minded. And because tactfulness is a relational skill, right? So we have to have relationships to build it, I think. The other thing is, of course, studying the wisdom teachings like the Tao Te Ching, the I Ching. Those are my go-tos when it comes to learning tactfulness, because they really teach you how to flow with different types of experiences and what the karmic, the likely karmic outcomes are based on how you respond to different kinds of experiences. Yeah. Unfortunately, there is no room for compromise when it comes to this unlawful government. We are strategically planning a mass enlightenment of we the people this very week. I hope we don't stuff it up. Good luck. Good luck. Hope that, yeah, I mean, I know that I don't know if that's coming from Australia as well, but yeah, hopefully things change for the better. All right, let's see. Let's see. Looking down through, what if these are occurring on the angles? Is it just going to feel more prominent? If these transits are showing up, if you have cardinal signs on the angles of your house, of the angles of your birth chart, like the first, 10th, 7th, and 4th houses, they probably would be, more potent and recognizable in your life or in your, in your space somewhere. Yeah. Let's see here. The 21st and winter solstice events come up often. Any words on that big shift everyone is talking about? Yeah, well, I'll be doing probably like a 2 or 3 part series, probably like a 3-part series on the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in Aquarius that's coming up on the winter solstice, but I won't do that until like November. That's another really big one. It was in the running for another, maybe the top 2 or 3 transit periods of the year. That probably number 2 next to Saturn and Pluto is the Jupiter Saturn conjunction at the end of the year. They kind of bookend the year. We'll be coming back to that. Let's see. What are your thoughts on synastry? I don't think I've ever heard you mention it. Yeah, I mean, I don't like composite charts. I personally like to sit 2 charts in front of me and look at them back and forth, and that tends to be how I have to understand what one chart is saying and then what another chart is saying, and then usually different kinds of connections or possible hotspot connections between the 2 charts will sort of come up by doing that exercise. So that's typically how I work with couples, or any 2 charts that I might be comparing. Love the I Ching. You've described it perfectly. A great tool for social maneuvering through hierarchies, etc., especially Confucius contemporaneous translations. Nice. Thank you. Yeah, I Ching is it's like a spiritual GPS. Let's see. Feels like the Clash of the Titans. Yeah. What do you think about manifesting? Is that considered more new age? Oh, that's a really interesting question. Let's see. Well, I mean, the basic idea that we are creators, we have agency and choice, and that our choices can result in things occurring, is obviously it's very real. Our karma is manifestation, right? Our karma is the manifestation of previous choices and desires and intentions that we've had behind our actions. And so the results that we experience in life come because we are manifestors, right? So I don't have any problem with the premise. But what I take issue with is the idea that what brings us happiness is to somehow manifest something in the material world that represents more of something that we want that we don't have. Like I'm going to manifest more wealth, or I'm going to manifest a partner or something like that. Because in the yogic tradition, at least, and the philosophy that was at the roots of Hellenistic astrology, we see this idea that it's who you are, not what happens around you, including whether you're manifesting a lot of really good things or bad things. It's who you are and what you are as a being that is the source of your happiness. And the more that you're in touch with that inherent consciousness, the happier you are. And really, that's what we're trying to manifest, is the awakening of that indwelling soul. So I find that some of the talk about I've really manifested a lot, or I'm manifesting this, or I'm manifesting that, is misguided, insofar as, my own belief system and the belief system of ancient astrologers would say that, you know, you can develop some power, some shakti in this world to get things, and if you focus on things, you can manifest things. All that's real, but it's also like, whatever you get, you'll lose eventually. Don't think that there's any two ways about it. Anything you could manifest in this world is temporary. And so the idea in ancient astrology is that you're really trying to, be in touch with the indwelling bliss of your own being, your own nature, and that that when we find that, we also find that the world, anything and everything in the world, we start to see and experience as love and as divine, including the bad stuff. And so I think that if that's not our focus, then manifesting something is that it's misguided, and it's a materialistic, it's like something materialistic charading itself as something spiritual. In a sense, it is a little bit more spiritual, because it's at least telling you that your thoughts and your mind and your agency have more shakti and almost like magical karmic power than people are sometimes aware of when they're living in a just entirely secular empirical worldview. So I appreciate it from that standpoint. It's making people realize that no, your mind is more powerful than you think it is, and stuff like that. But in terms of like, be a manifester, make a vision board, get what you want, I think that that's just like, for me, that's sort of just a spiritual, a slightly more spiritual form of materialism. I don't know, that seems like a contradiction to say those words together, but that's how I see it. And you don't have to agree with me, obviously. That's just, since you asked, that's what I think about it. We usually react instead of really listen to communicate. A lot of fear. Try to be calm, even if your opinion is different. Nice. Really like that. Hey, Achuta, the sun is in Venus's temple of Libra, and she's in her fall in Virgo. How exactly does this speak to the sun standing as it opposes Mars in its own domicile? Sun is in Venus temple. Oh, right. So you're asking about I see. Yeah, well, Venusian things are falling on hard times, right? So it's like the peaceful path is a little prohibited at the moment. Remember what Mercury stood for in ancient astrology. Among other things, Mercury was the ruler of divine chaos. I say divine because it's always meaningful, it's always purposeful, it's always intelligent. But when when your car breaks down, or when there's sudden snafu of technology, or something that comes up that's sort of chaotic and it's blippy and you have to deal with it, that's Mercury. And Mercury in that sense is a kind of like a chaos producing messenger that shifts things in ways that we don't always understand. Remember, Mercury is going invisible, and like that. Well, Venus, who likes pleasant, sort of predictable, harmonious things, is not so happy in Mercury's sign. And that's how the ancient astrologers explained it. So we have the sun in its fall in Libra, a place of darkness, whereas the sun likes light, and its ruler, Venus, is all jacked up in Mercury's sign, right? So the idea behind that, don't think of trying to apply this to your birth chart. We're talking now just about the mundane transit at the moment. The idea behind that is that the harmonious outcome that you want, the action that you seek, is not going to find smooth sailing. There's a lot of choppiness around getting to that nice, flowy, pleasant outcome that you desire. A lot of choppiness. That'll change after the new moon in Libra comes through at the end of this week. And then in the next couple of weeks, Venus gets back into Libra, where she picks up dignity again, goes from her fall to her rulership. And then the sun will also get out of its fall and move into Scorpio. Mars will turn direct by mid-November. All of those sequences between now and the middle of next month will shift things. So it'll come around. Everything will be okay. I mean, some things aren't okay, some things, but I'm talking in general, as we're feeling and experiencing these energies. If you're feeling really kind of like that sense of there being more chaotic choppiness, that'll pass after Mercury retrograde is done, after Venus gets out of Virgo, after Mars goes direct in mid-November, stuff like that. It's just real choppy right now because of that. That dignity exchange is one way of understanding it. Great question, Victoria. As usual, you're always on it. Do you use Vedic astrology as well? What are your thoughts on it as a system? Well, in ancient astrology, really the two systems are more alike than they are different. So I practice ancient, Greco-Roman Hellenistic astrology, which has its roots in Egypt, and it goes back even to like Babylon and Mesopotamia. But it shares philosophical roots with, Indian cosmology, with yoga. There's a lot of similarities between Plato, the Pythagoreans, the Hermeticists, the alchemists, the Egyptian mystics, and Indian yogis in yogic philosophy and the Vedic wisdom tradition. So there's more in common than there is different between those schools. And the charts are very similar. The houses are, of course, similar. The methodology is similar. One of the earliest texts that we know of historically in Sanskrit is called the Yavana Jataka, or Indian astrology text, which is possibly related to Yavana Jataka. Can one of the meanings that it can refer to is the astrology of the Greeks. And there's a lot of terminology in that book that shares with Greek terminology. So there's more in common between ancient Vedic astrology or Indian astrology and Western Greek astrology than most people who are really sunk into one view or the other would like to admit. And I think I think that they should be good friends. There's some differences. I would say that the zodiac, the calculation of the zodiac, sidereal versus tropical, is going to be one of the big differences. But boy, I've had some really accurate readings from Vedic astrologers and from a totally different zodiac. So I don't think it's a big deal. But I think you should probably stick with one system versus the other, because I think people can get confused when they're blending things too much. Maybe, I don't know. What's Shakti? Shakti would be like power. Like the if you've ever been to a holy place, it has a kind of Shakti, meaning it has an energetic power. And I went to the Amazon for ayahuasca ceremonies. Just the place before I had even drunk the medicine was very palpable. Like it's very powerful. It carries like an energy behind it. So Shakti typically means that there's kind of like a spiritually infused power within something. For example, I'm just using it generically. I'm not trying to use it in an overly technical manner. Some people could maybe dispute that I'm being too liberal with how I'm talking about Shakti, but you could, if you infuse a gemstone overnight, why are you doing it? Because you're charging it. You know what I mean? It's like, has that kind of feeling behind it. But there's different types of Shakti. There's not just one Shakti. It's just so I'm using it sort of generically, because there's Bhakti Shakti is different than other kinds of Shakti, for example. Anyway, so any recommendations for good periods to take off from work through the end of the year? Having a hard time choosing between rough astro weather and calm astro weather dates. Well, that's a good question. I think once Venus gets back into Libra, it would be like, I would wait until Venus is in Libra in terms of wanting to enjoy yourself. Venus better dignified I would think would translate into a more enjoyable or relaxed experience, or more harmonious things happening for you if you're looking for ease. That's I couldn't say much more unless I knew more and looked at charts and things like that, because it's probably dependent upon your birth chart too. What do you think of the sky for election day in the States? I'll be doing a separate forecast on that. I already did one about Trump and COVID and the election and so forth. And boy, I mean, I'd say it was probably my least favorite video I've done in the past year, just purely because, it just, like, everyone gets so riled up when you talk about politics. And I just, it's hard to get a million emails from people who are pissed off at what you said or did in like totally opposite directions. And you're like, you can't please everyone. So just try to be myself and stick to the spiritual, spiritual topics that are close to my heart that I think resonate with a larger audience. That's been sort of my approach. I know someone could criticize that too, but so I'm going to wait until closer to the election and probably do one more. And even then, probably regrettably. So, what would be an ideal reason to consult an astrologer? If you would ask a person you are giving a reading to, how can I help you? What would be a good answer? If you would ask a person you are giving a reading to, how can I help you? What would be a good answer? Yeah. Well, if you consult an astrologer, there's really, in my view, there's really maybe two reasons to do so. One would be that you want to understand what's going to happen karmically. Like where is the Tao flowing? What's like asking what's the weather like karmically, and knowing what the weather is like, you can prepare yourself, and there's a lot of value in that. I think that if you're asking that you want to know what's going to happen from a state of panic and anxiety, that's not a good reason to consult an astrologer, unless you're convinced that talking to an astrologer, regardless of what the answer is, it will put you at ease. If you go to an astrologer hoping for something, wishing for something, paranoid and anxious about something, you're going to put the astrologer into a really difficult position. And if the answer isn't what you like, you're going to stress yourself out a lot more. So I don't recommend going to an astrologer unless you really want to know where's the karmic weather heading, what should I be aware of, what should I prepare for, and I have an open mind and open heart to whatever that is. Yeah. And then so if it won't, you have to be careful, because if astrology is going to increase your anxiety, you really shouldn't blame an astrologer for that unless they're really being fear mongering and over the top. If an astrologer says, I think this or that type of experience could occur around this time, and it's not something that you're happy with, and then you blame them for it, that's going to be really bad karma for you, and for the astrologer too, to deal with someone like that. So don't go from that standpoint. Go from the standpoint of I want to know what's happening and how can I respond to it in the most sensitive, intelligent way, like a kind of like a karmic map. And the second reason would be because astrology, and I think this is a little deeper reason for asking an astrologer, going to see an astrologer, because you want to understand something that you're struggling with, in particular, a pattern, a place in your life, and sometimes just talking it over and hearing how it's represented astrologically can help you to separate yourself from it a little bit, because we also get really wrapped up in the idea that my problems are my problems, and your problems are not your problems any more than your money or your clothing is actually your money or clothing, right? Problems and gifts and vices and virtues and things like that, if we think that our worth or our spiritual advancement is tied to our problems and our solving of our problems, we're going to put a lot of pressure on ourselves. So one of the best things that astrology can do for people is help people to gain a little bit of like transcendental perspective on problems. They're not your problems. They're just problems. Problems exist. You exist too. You exist and you have a relationship with problems. If you can start to understand the nature of problems and in a cosmic sense, that gives you this confidence. I'm a being. I have relationship with problems. I'm not going to solve the existence of problems. You know what I mean? And I think that gives you flexibility. And it's the flexibility that then, just like that we were talking about today, helps you flow around that season of life more intelligently. I think those are the best questions. But that doesn't mean that I see people every single day that have anxieties about things and that, have worries about things. And you have to meet people where they are. So I wouldn't say that there's anything that if people, wherever people are at, that's where I try to meet them in a session. But if people say, if I say, how can I help you? What I really like as a reader is if people have very clear questions about what they want to learn about, what they want to know more about, what particular areas of life they want kind of a karmic weather report on. The more specific it is, the easier it is for me to hone in. The more they're like, oh, I just want to hear what you have to say. I'm like, well, you have to understand that, like, it's hard for people in general to just generically care about someone that they've never met or have nothing to do with. And I'm not saying that because I want to have compassion to care that much about people. But generally speaking, what engages us in concern for each other is when there's the ability to serve each other, to give or help each other with something. When people are like, yeah, I don't have anything I really need your help with. I'm just curious to hear you talk about my chart. For me, it then feels like I have to perform for a person. And I immediately don't like that. And it's harder for me to like feel compassion and care and like interest in the person. So when a person says these specific things, I'd really like your insight on, or your guidance, or whatever you see in the chart or whatever, then I'm like, oh, okay. Now I've got something I can do, I got a load I can pull, and that makes me excited. And then I'm really engaged. I can't stand it when people are like, yeah, just tell me what you see. I'm just curious. That just feels like performance to me when it's like that. But whatever. Some people ask me that, and I do the song and dance. It's part of the job. So anyway, Are fixed stars considered in Hellenistic astrology? Yes. Yes. Let's see. I am trying to. Yeah, okay. Let's see. It's overwhelming trying to absorb so much information and knowledge when you are craving understanding yourself in this world. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Do you look into asteroids in transit? I don't. You guys have heard me, like, sometimes I bash asteroids, but I'm just not into them. They're not my thing. But I have no, like, if you're into them, that's cool. I always tell people, like, if your astrology is becoming more clear and concise and accurate, and you're using, asteroids, great. If your chart is starting to look like, Jackson, what is his last name? Pollock. If it's starting to look like his painting, just splatter painted stuff everywhere all over the chart, and you can't say anything, you're just like, oh, you've had a lot, you've gone through a lot, and, like, you're really going to be a healer. It's like, if it's like that, I'd, be careful of it becoming more generic, in other words. All right. Let's see. Thank you, Crystalline. Always my guardian here. Thank you. I appreciate that. That was a nice comment you left. Let's see. Let's see. I'm going down. Is there a way to read about the actual announcement declaration of the winner of the election? Well, that would be horary. That's one way of doing it, which I did a video on recently. I got the last one wrong, though. So, like, I'm really, there's something about putting your own ego on the line with predictions that the Oracle seems to deliver some swift kicks in the pants to. Like, my record when I'm working for people privately is so much better than I do public horaries. So I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, anyway, but I will revisit that horary that I did with the results, whatever they are, and try to demonstrate if I got it wrong, how and why I got it wrong. So we'll see. Currently watching your Hermetica series. Recommend any books about the Egyptian influence on astrology? Yeah, I mean, it's so complicated because not a lot of people are into astrology enough and taking it seriously enough to go back and write, like, serious, well-written books about the philosophical overlap between astrology and these different schools, which we're still learning more about. My main teacher, Robert Schmidt, was convinced that, astrology comes from the sort of Pythagorean, Platonic, Egyptian, Hermeticist crock pot, and I agree with him on that, and as well as believe that there's a really strong influence from India as well. I tend to believe that the perennial philosophy that informs astrology probably originally comes from India, but that's just a speculation. I don't know, and I don't stake my life on it or anything. Someone asked about eclipses. Judith Hill has a book, Eclipse and Your Lunar Nodes. Yeah, which I've mentioned in several episodes before. I have that book. It's a fine book. In fact, I'd like to have Judith come and speak with my students at some point in the speaker series, because she's fun. Asteroid basher. Yeah. It's certainly, like, I certainly have a real grouchy side about certain things that I don't like. Could you speak more on the Bhakti tradition you follow? Do you follow the Krishna consciousness teachings? Yeah, that's right. Bhakti yoga is centered on the on Krishna and Radha, on that divine couple. So yeah, you can learn more about it on my website. There's a Bhakti tab on my website, and I have a whole private channel filled with just videos on Bhakti yoga and Bhakti philosophy. Including things that you can do to practice Bhakti at home, stuff like that. So I have a video coming out this week. I'm really hesitant to release it this week because of all the astrology and just not wanting to have to deal with, like, really pissed off, angry people all week. Sorry, so just being honest. But the video is, I got a question from somewhere. Sometimes I do crossover videos where I'm talking about a topic that's related to both astrology and Bhakti yoga, and sometimes I get those questions. So sometimes I'll do, like, a crossover video so that people who are interested in learning more about Bhakti and yoga philosophy and its crossover with astrology, or the way that I practice astrology, I'll do a crossover video for people. And I have one this week that's came when someone asked the question, should I bring up God during a reading if I'm reading a chart for someone? And I sort of tackle that question, but it's coming from the standpoint of obviously the belief and faith in God and in the soul, which not everyone who watches my channel may necessarily have. So you all know that I'm pretty open and overt about my spiritual practices and beliefs, but I try to kind of mix my content up. So sometimes there's just talks on transits and what to expect and kind of just straight astrology. And then other times my talks become like sermons from the stars. They like infuse that spiritual element of yoga and devotion and faith into the process. And so I'm always it's kind of a balancing act, and bringing those two together all the time. So there's this crossover video that's coming out probably this week, if I'm brave enough, talking about whether or not you should bring up God in an astrology reading. And that will give you a sense of what kind of content I also have available on my Bhakti channel. So I hope that helps. Hi from Boone, North Carolina. Oh, hi. There's a temple in Boone that some of my friends go to. That's cool. So, year one student, thank you for the class. Hey, Emma, good to see you. I'm glad that you could be here. Do you believe that 3 eclipses in 2020 will have influences into next year? The 3, yeah, of course, yeah, they carry over. It's like sets of waves that are coming through for sure. Do you see a food shortage coming soon? I haven't thought about it. Maybe that's something. If there's something that astrologers have been saying about that, I haven't read it. But at this point, the 2020 has been quite a year. So at some point, I guess I would be like not surprised if something crazy like a food shortage happened. But let's see. What book did you recommend on numerology? Not me. I don't have any real connection to numerology. I don't have anything against it. It's just not something I've studied. Did you study comparative religion or similar at university? You're super knowledgeable and accurately articulate. I have my bachelor's degree is in philosophy and theology. And then it's just been, I had an MA and an MFA in creative writing and a lot of literary theory. And then, I'm just a voracious reader. So I've studied a lot of psychology, religion, history, things like that. But I'm not like, I'm an amateur in a lot of ways. I just have a good memory. Sometimes. Can I pay you by Patreon or PayPal as acknowledgement of the wisdom? Well, at the end of every year, the last 40 days of the year, I have a Kickstarter where I raise money from anyone who enjoys my channel. And there's like gift readings that I have available. There's discounted tuition to all my courses that come in for the following year for 2021 and stuff like that. So that will happen at the end of November, and you'll see me plugging that like every day, the last 40 days of the year. I'll be like, hey, if you like this, please donate. We're trying to get to so many backers and so forth. So it's like a little fundraising drive at the end of the year. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. Let's see. Much love from England. Thank you. Cool. Egypt is older and seeded both India and Greece and is still younger than its predecessor black nations of people. Human life on Earth is at least 1 billion years old. Civilization is 1 million. Yeah, I can't say that I'm interested in the which civilization is oldest rhetoric. I personally find it a distraction from, I'll just say that I find it distracting for myself personally. So I don't really care. But not to say that you're caring or anyone else is caring isn't a valid, interesting pursuit. It's just not something I care to argue with people about. Truth is truth is truth. Wherever it comes from, it comes through time and space and people and ages. And I'm just grateful that it's come into my life. So let's see. It is said, 30 years to become a competent astrologer. I mean, yeah, I don't have any problem with that. Seems like I feel like I'm learning new stuff every single day. but is it 30? Maybe it's some other number too. I don't know. um, let's see. Um, do you like to work with progress charts? Yeah, they're like an add-on to my practice. They're not the focus, but I use them. Yeah. Where in the chart do you look for clues for the type of daily spiritual practice that would be a good fit for the native ninth house sun? You know, I think that it's better to talk to someone about that than it is to look at the chart. I don't think the chart necessarily has a clear way of depicting that. Sometimes it does, but I've never found a way of looking at a chart and being like, oh, this spiritual practice would be totally for you. Sometimes, but yeah, like sometimes I could say a more stoic approach or a more like embodied sensual feminine approach or something like that. But uh, it's hard to be like very, very specific, I guess is what I'm saying. Aloha from Iceland. Wow, that's awesome. What can you tell me about the Aquila constellation in relation to current planetary alignment? Nothing. Sorry, don't got anything for you there. Sounds interesting though. What do you think about this peak of Mars retrograde? Any things you didn't expect? Well, I feel like I'm still in it. I'll have to give that answer in like 2 weeks. You could look to find, thank you for the question though. What do you think about teaching kids astrology? I think it's fun to teach them about patterns and about myths and fairy tales and start getting them accustomed to the idea that there are these characters, that live in the mind, that live in the world, that live in story. Slowly introducing them to that. But the heavier metaphysical things, I think kids need to trust that they're in a magical universe before they get, clobbered with like, okay, meditate, you're not your body, like like my kids, I just focus on like fairy tales, mythology, storytelling, fantasy, imagination, play, and helping them see things like sometimes I'll explain like that's Mars or that's Venus, or kind of helping them do that pattern recognition. That I'm personally, that's how I'm approaching it with my kids. And I'd say that up until maybe like teenage years would probably be better than trying to install like a metaphysical, religious, like heavy philosophical program. Because I think we need to come to that program from the standpoint of our soul, and the soul is romantic. The soul is the soul needs a deep, motivating reason to get engaged with something, and I think that you can't, if you try to force something on someone, it's often not gonna, the soul won't like it. Whereas if it finds interest in something, and I've laid out the possibilities for, I've laid out like receptor sites for my kids to connect to later, they, then I think that works. So that's how my parents did it in the church that I was raised in. They didn't tell me I had to love church. They told me I could really not like it. They told me, they had ways of helping me explore religion and spirituality through books that I liked reading, fantasy and play, but they always were helping me find connections back to these eternal truths. And I think that that's probably better for kids. Let's see. Is there a cure or remedy for laziness in astrology? What is the right way of looking at laziness? Oh, wow. Well, yeah, I mean, sometimes the second and the eighth houses were called the idle places. That's a whole different conversation. Actually, I probably shouldn't get into it, but I think that in general, the cure for laziness is to figure out what potentially what is behind our laziness, or where it comes from, what we want, and why, what we're experiencing in contrast to what we want. I don't find a lot of lazy people feeling like they're really happy with their life, unless they're lazy and sort of indignant at the same time, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I think yoga probably deals better with, yoga, Buddhism, Eastern wisdom traditions have a lot to say, I think, about laziness, but I'm not sure that astrology per se has any particular way of addressing it. It can probably identify it or spot it, or say watch out for it during this transit or something, better than it could be like, here's the time-tested astrological answer to laziness. Because astrology, I mean, it would be a bit like the weatherman being charged with the responsibility of telling you precisely, how you should respond emotionally to rain. Astrology is like telling you it's going to rain, or describing the rain, or telling you how long it's going to last or when it's going to come. But we need the wisdom traditions to tell us how to interact with it. So that's why astrology is paired with yoga. Just like Ayurveda is physical study of medicine, it's paired with yoga. It's paired with spiritual life. Do I study human design? No, I don't personally. Does zodiacal releasing ever give you a crisis of whether free will truly exists? No, absolutely not. Because the ancient, ancient yogis, especially in Indian astrology, and even coming in the Western tradition, are very clear that the things that are determined, that are fated, are due to your actions. They're not. So when people are like, "Oh my gosh, everything that's happening is according to this." Kind of this mapped out timing, and zodiacal releasing makes me feel like there's just no room for free will. It's like, oh, you just don't have a sophisticated enough understanding of fate or free will yet. And I'm not trying to be condescending in saying that. It's just the truth. The like, very clearly, fate is a result of our free choices. The things that come back to us through fate are occurring because of our choices that we've made in previous lives. And that what that means is that fate is a result of free will, right? Fate is you can't disentangle fate and free will. They're together. So zodiacal releasing, nothing in astrology has ever made me think that, no matter the most amazingly predictive things, techniques, moments in my career have never convinced me that free will is not real. I find that to be a very strange, personally, very strange response to zodiacal releasing. It's as if whoever's thinking that is caught in some kind of like a binary way of thinking about things, that they haven't read enough of the ancient philosophy around fate and free will. But that's just me. That one annoys me. Sorry. Not your question, or not you, but just that when people think about it like that, like, oh my God, this predictive technique, it must mean we're living in a cube where everything is completely predetermined. And I feel like, has no one ever studied karma for more than 10 seconds, to learn enough that we understand that this world operates according to laws that are predictable, but those laws are in concert with choice. So the laws are like modulating and working with choice all the time, in incredibly moment by moment, infinitely intelligent manner. So astrology lets us predict some of how the laws are going to play out. Some systems are very, very accurate, but that doesn't mean that they're not being shaped and changed and altered by free will, and that the things that are being mapped out are not also in relation to previous choices. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Where would I suggest learning more about zodiacal releasing? It's in part of my year 2 program, so you could certainly study it there. Chris Brennan on the Astrology Podcast has some. I think he's done several talks on zodiacal releasing that are quite good. His way of doing zodiacal releasing does vary in some ways compared to some of the ways in which I was taught elements of zodiacal releasing from Robert Schmidt, but they're pretty minor. So yeah, there's, and I think there's some information on it in his book, Hellenistic Astrology, as well. Let's see. A video about fixed stars. They're not as big a part of my practice. I don't feel qualified to, because they're just, I'm not that intimate or familiar with them outside of horary and maybe 7 or 8 fixed stars. I would recommend Austin Coppock for that, he did a talk at my school for my students on the fixed stars that was quite good a few years ago. And he may have something on his website about it. There's also, I want to say, there's the Astrology King, which is a website that has a lot of data about the fixed stars that you might find useful. Vivian Robson has a book on the fixed stars. Bernadette Brady has a book on the fixed stars. Those are some places you might find more information. I can't go into some of these questions. They're too long. Linda says numerology is the simplest form of astrology. Each science is one of the puzzle pieces. I agree. Although the numerology of like modern numerology is very different from the kind of numerology that was inherent in Greek philosophy. So there's some really big differences there. So it's not like if you just pick up like a modern text on numerology that you'll be learning the same way of mathematically thinking about the meaning of numbers that ancient Greeks were using. And that's something that Robert Schmidt spent a lot of time talking about when he was first, because he was a mathematician who was translating, ancient Greek books on algebra and things like that, and also sort of decoding a lot of these astrological textbooks from the Hellenistic tradition. So he's made that distinction a number of times. Love from Brazil. Oh, cool. Without using your books, you need years and years. Let's see. Can you briefly explain what dark night of the soul is? It's just a dark time in your life. It's a time where you doubt, and you feel lost. And I'm sure I think it's a little bit more common than we like. It's a poetic way of talking about a very common experience that we have. We don't want to be here. We think everything is very dark. There's a lot of doubt about who we are or about what is real. And we, if you ever want to read a, really good story that's like very dark night of the soul, read the book of Job, in the Old Testament. It's a good one. A lot of people have written on it, and I can only say that, many ayahuasca ceremonies people describe as having kind of like a dark night of the soul motif behind it. And there's a feeling of really losing your way, of losing sanity, stability, health, safety, assuredness. But when you encounter that and you live through it, there's a degree of surrender that comes that often, so the dark night of the soul often precipitates spiritual growth. Anyway, that's simple. But there's been so many people, like Mother Teresa really sort of had dark night of the soul toward the very end of her life. There, some people who have written about it that I think from a number of different perspectives, different religious traditions and so forth. Let's see. Nice. Laura has a nice definition of dark night of the soul. When you feel cut off from God, anything loving or creative. It's like depression, but it can be totally spiritual. Good. Is it true that planets in your 12th house represent your past life karma? I have 5 there. No, it is not true. Everything in your chart represents your past life karma because that's what your chart is. It's a depiction of your karma. Let's see. What opinion do you have of what happens after we die? Well, just like this, just like this life, we're born into a new body potentially, and we continue on the trajectory of what we are most emotionally and what we're most invested in, what we're most absorbed in and concerned with, and our life takes on a new shape, a new form, a new story to gratify our desire to continue being concerned and absorbed with certain things. This is why in Bhakti we say that the moment of death is so important, because if you've cultivated a life that when you get to your dying moment, wherever and however that may occur, and what's on your mind is love of God, love of others, and the desire to be absorbed in spiritual service, to be in alignment with the whole, when those things are on your mind and your heart when you pass, it's conducive to spiritual, continued spiritual growth in the direction of greater happiness and realization. That's a complicated topic, but yeah. Hi from Boulder, Colorado. Would you say that a strong transit like this could be similar to a zodiac sign like Scorpio, for instance? Signs aren't strong. Every sign is strong, right? Every sign is, the only thing that Scorpio would really have in common with this moment is that, Mercury's turning retrograde in Scorpio. It's a Mars ruled sign, and Mars is really in the air right now. So on that level, yeah, it's like you could say you wouldn't, I just, in ancient astrology, there's not nearly as much of a sort of obsession about the signs. It's more about planets. So it's a Mars moment, and that, that has something to do with Scorpio, but it's people think of themselves as signs, right? And they think of other people and situations as signs. And in ancient astrology, it's really more about the planets. Anyway, Mrs. AJ, I'm a widow to suicide. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's really rough. She says, my husband was affected by antidepressants in a toxic workplace. This is why I ask about 5 planets in my 12th. Yeah, I'm just really sorry to hear that. Unfortunately, the world is we're in, so many of us are in environments that are really, really toxic, to our souls. I'm really sorry to hear that you went through that and that he went through that. In terms of your 5 planets in the 12th, if the ruler of the 7th is in the 12th, if Venus is in the 12th, that can speak to some really deep losses around love, lovers, spouses. Not always, but that can be one of the significations of such an event. But I would need to look, more at your chart. And all I would say is that, there could have been 10 other ways, 10 other placements in the chart that could show a spouse passing. And so there's probably in other words, it's not that like your chart is more karmic or more karmically difficult or heavy just because you have planets in those houses. You've been through something that a lot of people haven't gone through. And that level of pain may feel very unique, but the karma in the chart could depict that in a lot of different ways, that unique experience. That's what I'm trying to say. So, yeah. Thanks for asking that question, and, hang in there. I hope astrology is bringing you some way of reflecting on those experiences that's healing and helpful, Why is it hard being a Scorpio? Well, you're not a Scorpio, you're a soul, right? Rebecca Jane says, why is it hard being a Scorpio? It's hard. I think it's hard to be any zodiac sign, right? As you start thinking about yourself as a sign, it usually feels hard. If you think about yourself as a soul, it never been born and will never die, and it's inherently beautiful, blissful, that's being guided every step of the way through all these different dimensions of experience, and that this chart is just a symbolic map helping you understand those experiences. It'll help you because you're not really a Scorpio, and it's also helpful to get a full look at your chart from a reading, so that way you can also diversify your psychic portfolio a little bit. You have lots of planets and lots of signs, lots of aspects, and there's probably whatever you feel is difficult about your life or about your existence is probably reflected in a variety of different things in the chart, and diversifying that a little bit can take you out of the narrow and oftentimes overly critical understanding of yourself as like just one sign. So that would be my advice. You're not a Scorpio. You're Rebecca Jane. You're the fantastic Rebecca Jane. Okay. I'm just playing. What is a mystic rectangle? What does it represent? I have 10 really smart ass answers to that. A mystic rectangle would be like a modern aspect pattern that people have come up with relatively recently that doesn't have a history behind it interpretively. So it means a lot of different things because it's sort of made up. And I'm not saying that there's nothing to it. There could be. What I would recommend, what I tell all of my students is like, before you go thinking about a mystic rectangle, learn to read the difference between, 6 or 7 different kinds of trines, because a trine itself is very, very, very diverse. And if people don't know those basics really, really intimately and diversely, your mystic rectangle probably won't add anything that helps you sharpen your abilities as a reader. In fact, it often just kind of dulls it. So that would be my response to the mystic rectangle question. Not that there's nothing to it, just that I would not at all put it at the top of my list of things to be concerned about when you're learning to become a better astrologer. That's why I love ancient astrology so much, because it's like, hey, there's all these different kinds of trines, there's all these different kinds of sextiles, and the basics, the small set of basic things are so diverse and so sophisticated. And if you learn about it, you limit yourself a little bit more. Your ability to improvise becomes a lot greater. It's a lot harder to improvise when you give yourself a set of a billion things that you're trying to meaningfully improvise with, because you don't know them well enough to know how they play and hang off from one another. Let's see. Okay. I think that's it for the day. Um, how do you differentiate between a planet expressing action on the stage of the house and sign in comparison to the planet representing a person in your chart? That's complicated. I get into that in my class, my year one class. So it would take me way too long, but um, let's see. Bonatti says Moon in Gemini has a debilitation because it's 12th from its domicile. Do you recognize that? I've heard that before, and I've read that before. I have all Bonatti's texts, um, but I've never found a meaningful use for that, honestly. Like, okay, great. So it's debilitated just because it's in the 12th place from the moon. I get it, but I need more of an understanding of why that's the case. Just because Bonatti says so, like, isn't enough for me. So, another thing I love about Hellenistic astrology is that we have a number of really amazing thinkers who have done a lot of work to help us think about why certain things were taught and what the underlying philosophical or metaphysical principles were behind the symbolism. If that's not there, I find it hard to just take something wholesale. Like, that's the one thing that really pushed me from modern astrology to ancient astrology, was being like, I don't like it when someone's just like, this, now go do it. I'm like, well, why? I want to understand why, not because I doubt you, but because if I understand why, I have more knowledge with which to use the tool I'm using. So, I think there's a little less of that with medieval astrology than there is with Hellenistic astrology at this point in time. So anyway, glad to be helpful. Thank you, Mrs. AJ. Glad to be helpful. All of us are neurotic. Yeah, I can get down with that. Is self-teaching astrology a disaster waiting to happen? No, you can self-teach. You can learn a lot from books and from online courses, and picking kind of going at things your own way. I did that for a while, and then I started getting teachers. And for me, having teachers who have sort of seen a lot and done a lot, and maybe been trained more formally in certain times or settings, it's beneficial to also, in addition to maybe teaching yourself, to have some teachers, because there's a lot of times there's habits that we don't even know that we have, or there's misunderstandings we have that we don't even know that we have. And, having a few teachers around in your life, I think, as an astrologer, can help you with that. So I think it's good to have teachers, but I have nothing against people kind of doing their own thing as well, because I've done that too. I think it's more of the setting these days, because astrology is like more of a maverick profession. Anyway, that's what I've got for today. Thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate all of your comments, and feel free to tell me about your experiences with the Sun-Mars opposition this week. We'll be back for more as the week goes on. We'll kind of take it one transit at a time. Don't forget, by the way, almost forgot to mention, my new class, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic, is starting on November 14th. It is a one-year program in Hellenistic astrology. There's 30 classes on the year, 12 guest lectures. We have breakout study sessions, tutoring sessions, and we have optional bonus material, optional reading, optional homework and quizzes. There's just so much there for you, as much or as little as you want, to really immerse yourself in classical astrology, the spiritual philosophy of ancient astrology. And by the end of the program, the last 10 classes, we are working live charts with live clients. You're going to watch me read for people, and then we interact afterward. And then you're also going to, it's like seeing my client practice live, basically. And then we also have sessions where we just bring in charts into class that we work on as a group, implementing all the theory that we've learned. That's my year one program. There's also a year two program and a horary program. So you can check those all out on my website, nightlightastrology.com. There's an early bird rate if you sign up and pay in full before the start of the course. You get like $500 off. There's a payment plan if you need it. And there's also need-based tuition for people who are struggling. Never like to price anyone out, and especially if you're struggling due to COVID-19. All right. Okay. Take it easy, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.